I don't understand, what exactly is a death day party? Elena asked. Salazar seemed amused at the 10 supernaturals' reaction as they each inspected the chamber the death day party was being held and collectively winced at what sounded like 1,000 fingernails scraping an enormous blackboard. "'Tis when a ghost celebrates the anniversary of his or her death," he chuckled when the flabbergasted stares focused on him. Cole gritted his teeth and clapped his hands over his ears. "Is that supposed to be music? Is that supposed to be music?" Alex whispered before they approached nearly headless Nick, who was standing by a doorway hung with black velvet drapes. "Exactly what I said." Cole grinned while everyone laughed. "My dear friends," he said mournfully, "welcome, welcome. So pleased you could come." Rebecca scoffed, like they had a choice. He practically bamboozled them into accepting after saving Venus from that ghastly caretaker's ire. Shadowing the Troubles threesome, the 10 supernaturals were astounded by the innumerous amount of ghosts. Jeremy gaped at one in particular who had an arrow sticking out of his forehead. "That looks painful." "Oh crap," Venus hissed, and her and Alex began to harshly tug Neville away from a glum-looking ghost with lank hair and thick, pearly spectacles. "That's moaning Myrtle. Best to avoid her." At Neville's perplexed frown, Alex rolled her eyes. "Imagine trying to pee while she's moaning and moping above you. She haunts the girls' bathroom on the first floor and it's always out of order because she keeps flooding the place." Venus nodded vigorously. "Alex and I made the mistake of going there once," she shuddered. "Never again." Caroline giggled at the thought, but her laughter died at the sight of the buffet, her face turning positively green with disgust. Elijah shook his head, a pinched look crossing his face. "Is that supposed to be food?" Watching a ghost pass the table with rotten food, Salazar chuckled. "Since ghosts cannot eat, the more rotten the food, the stronger the taste would be for them. It's not meant to be edible." They were distracted by the mischievous poltergeist, Peeves, as he had overheard Venus and Alex complain about Myrtle and beckoned the aforementioned ghost forward to cause mayhem. As Myrtle burst into anguished sobs and fled from the dungeon, Cole sniggered loudly. "I like Peeves." "Oh yes, I like him too," Salazar smirked. After all, he had been the only one out of the founders with the ability to control that bloody menace. However, Salazar's good mood was short-lived. Once the 3 second years departed the dungeons in the hopes of feasting on some desserts in the Great Hall, Venus abruptly halted in her footsteps, emerald eyes bewilderedly taking in her surroundings as she heard a menacing, sibilant voice that only he could hear. What is it?" Neville asked, both he and Alex staring at Venus in confusion. "Can't you hear it? It's that voice again." Venus gasped. "Shush and listen." "What voice?" Klaus snarled, his blue-green eyes piercing the scene. It wasn't the first time she complained about a voice, but since that fool Lockhart heard nothing during detention, he shook it off as Venus having an overactive imagination. But as he followed her scampering through the halls, following a disembodied voice, Klaus felt an ominous feeling stirring in the air, and he didn't like it. Salazar clenched his eyes shut in sorrow at the sound of his precious familiar hissing and snarling about smelling blood, darkened by centuries of isolation, and then Riddle further darkening her morality and twisting her mind for his own cruel agenda. "It's going to kill someone," Venus shouted, running down the flight of stairs 3 at a time before hurtling around the whole second corridor, not stopping until she turned a corner into the last, deserted passage. Panting harshly, Alex's eyes widened at the shiny blemish on the wall. "Oh my God! What the?" Klaus, Elijah, Cole and Rebecca hesitantly approached the wall, their sharp eyes taking in the letterings. From behind them, Bonnie recited the inscription, her voice oozing with confusion. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." "What the hell does that mean?" "It's written in blood," Klaus spat out, his eyes taking in the frozen form of the caretaker's cat, and Elena gasped out, "Is it dead?" "No," Salazar snarled out, taking them all aback by the sudden change in his demeanor. Gone was the mirthful gleam in his eyes and the playful smirk, replaced by a sort of blazing fury that was disturbingly intense. It has been petrified, and he cursed sharply beneath his breath. Before they could converse further about the abrupt change in events, footsteps began echoing around them, followed by a cacophony of joyful chattering. The troublous threesome were surrounded on all sides, and silence fell among the mass of students, all of whom were pressing forward to witness the grisly sight. Enemies of the heir, beware. You'll be next, mudbloods. Draco Malfoy pushed to the front of the crowd, his cold eyes alive and his pale face flushed as he took in the sight of the hanging, immobile cat. Bastard! Rebecca sneered. That boy is too young to have a sadistic nature, she snapped. Naturally, they were all enlightened by Salazar that mudblood was a slur solely meant for Mulborns, insulting their blood as dirty blood. It was so bizarre to the 10 supernaturals, the bigotry and racism toward what blood type others had, almost as though having O or AB blood types made humans superior to those that had A's or B's. It was a mockery and quite amusing for the vampires whose diet comprised of blood. What's going on here? What's going on? Argus Filch pushed his way through the crowd and instantly fell back, clutching his face in horror at the sight of his beloved cat. My cat! My cat! What's happened to Mrs. Norris? He shrieked. Subsequently, his bulging eyes fell on Venus. You've murdered my cat. You killed her. I'll kill you. I'll touch her hair on her head and I'll make sure you suffer through a painful and excruciatingly slow death, Klaus snarled out through gritted teeth, his fists clenching and unclenching from where he stood behind the honey blonde and her 2 friends. The other original siblings nodded fervently in wholehearted agreement, each one of them glaring furiously at the cantankerous caretaker. The headmaster intruded at a timely fashion and demanded everyone but the troublous threesome depart. The 10 supernaturals and a suspiciously quiet Salazar shadowed them into Lockhart's office, and despite the precarious predicament, Cole, Damon, Jeremy and Caroline couldn't help but snort softly at the plethora of Lockharts in their respective portraits dodging out of sight to remove their hair curlers. Klaus stood stoically, his blue-green eyes never once detaching from Dumbledore's form as he examined the immobile cat, his crooked nose barely an inch from its fur. Oh God, would that sad excuse of a teacher just shut up? Damon groaned loudly. Salazar sneered at the wizard in distaste. There is no such thing as a transmogrifian torture, you blithering moron. How he graduated from or even got his acceptance into Hogwarts in the first place astounds me. She's not dead, Argus, Dumbledore softly revealed, cutting into Lockhart's inane ramblings. She has been petrified, but how? I cannot say. Ask her. Filch shirked, his blotched and tear-stained face turned toward an outraged Venus who stood between an equally infuriated Alex and Neville. Dumbledore, however, shook his head and firmly stated, no second year could have done this. It would take dark magic of the most advanced. But Filch wouldn't hear it. She did it. You saw what she wrote on the wall. She found, in my office, she knows I'm a squib. What the bloody hell is a squib? Rebecca snapped, pivoting around to confront their grim-looking guide. Dragging a hand down his face, Salazar made himself heard over Venus's yelling. A squib is simply the opposite of a Mulborn. To simply put it, they are witches and wizards born into a magical family but lack any magic of their own, rendering them a squib. Bonnie let out a long sigh, though her hazel orbs shone with fascination. There are so many different ideologies, and things that need to be taken into consideration when it comes to this world. Everything is so confusing, and complex, and there are just so many rules and, no comment. Alex glared at Snape after he commented on their disappearance at the Halloween feast. We were at Sir Nicholas' Death Day party. If you don't believe us, there are countless of witnesses that can vouch for us. Venus snapped at her most hated professor. Snape sneered down at them, his black eyes glittering in the candlelight. But why not join the feast? Why go down that corridor? Neville puffed up and convincingly lied. We weren't hungry. Elena clapped her hands together, her face alight with joy. "To go, Neville. He's standing up to the teacher he fears the most." Ignoring the trio, Snape whipped around to face Dumbledore. "I suggest, Headmaster, that Potter is not being entirely truthful. It might be a good idea if she were deprived of certain privileges until she is ready to tell us the whole story. I personally feel she should be taken off the Gryffindor Quidditch team until she is ready to be honest." "You greasy bat!" Cole snarled, his mahogany orbs turning slightly red as he maliciously glared at Snape. Klaus tried containing his rage. He did not appreciate Snape's contempt toward Venus, and he would be damned if he'd allow it to continue if he decides to personally raise Venus once this all ended. "Really, Severus?" Professor McGonagall sharply retorted. "I see no reason to stop the girl playing Quidditch. This cat wasn't hit over the head with a broomstick. There is no evidence at all that Potter has done anything wrong." Venus insolently scoffed. "Professor Snape knows that the only way Slytherin would win is by cheating." Laughter erupted out of the 10 supernaturals. Even Klaus couldn't help but genuinely smile at Venus's cheek. Salazar fondly beamed down at Venus, his head shaking in amusement. Their reaction drowned out the yelling of Snape, and he was only quieted down by Dumbledore, who allowed the Troubles threesome permission to leave after informing the caretaker that they would be able to cure Cat with a Mandrake restorative draft. "So that disgusting plant is the only cure for those that have been petrified?" Caroline inquired after Salazar, who curtly nodded. They shadowed the trio into an empty classroom where Alex and Neville started interrogating Venus. "You think I should have told them about the voice I heard?" Venus bit her lip in worry. "No," Neville exclaimed without hesitation, "hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world." Alex suddenly whined. We're gonna have to research about this voice you heard, aren't we?" Venus looked equally glum as she nodded. "I hate the library as much as you do, but what other choice do we have?" The scene began forwarding, giving them ample time to interrogate Salazar. "You know about this mysterious voice, don't you?" Klaus abruptly asked, his eyes hardening with anger and concern. Salazar sighed loudly, and suddenly, they all noticed how weary he looked as compared to when he first materialized to them. Salazar inclined his head toward the scene that finally paused on the History of Magic class. "Some of your questions shall be answered now. My advice to you is to listen carefully." Hermione Granger interrupted Ben's monotone by raising her hand. "I was wondering if you could tell us anything about the Chamber of Secrets." One by one, every student that had a dazed look in their eyes or had fallen asleep, snapped their head toward the ghost, all of them awoken from their trance. It took some wheedling and cajoling before he finally acquiesced and announced, "The legend of which you speak is such a very sensational, even ludicrous tale." But the whole class was now hanging on Professor Binns's every word for the first time in ever. "Oh, very well. Let me see. The Chamber of Secrets." The 10 supernaturals listened with bated breaths as the boring ghost reached to the very point they were almost curious of. "You all know, of course, that Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago. The precise date is uncertain, by the 4 greatest witches and wizards of the age. The 4 schoolhouses are named after them: Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. They built this castle together, far from prying my lies, for it was an age when magic was feared by common people, and witches and wizards suffered much persecution. Especially from the Vikings," Salazar grumpily added. "For a few years, the founders worked in harmony together, seeking out youngsters who showed signs of magic and bringing them to the castle to be educated. But then disagreements sprang up between them. A rift began to grow between Slytherin and the others. Slytherin wished to be more selective about the students admitted to Hogwarts. He believed that magical learning should be kept within all magic families. He disliked taking students of mole parentage, believing them to be untrustworthy. After a while, there was a serious argument on the subject between Slytherin and Gryffindor, and Slytherin left the school.